even ironically enough, as an archaeologist, as someone who loves history, loves touching the past, loves that connection, that moment that you feel when you understand something about another person who you're never going to meet because you're so far separated in time and space. Even that, with all of that said, I wouldn't want to go to Titanic. I don't see the point of going there. Hello, and welcome to something a little bit different. In this Watching Brief episode, it's kind of like one of our Unstratified Entertainment episodes, in so much as we're looking at what became media and documentary series for the purposes of exploring a disaster. But I'm hesitant to call it an entertainment show. Unstratified Entertainment doesn't seem appropriate. So this is a sort of Watching Brief media and historical context examination and exploration of the Titan submersible disaster. It's now the case that the investigation by the U.S. Coast Guard and other interested parties has delivered their conclusions on what happened. And really, I suppose what we're interested in terms of the angle that we're taking is one of initially, I guess, historical context and dark tourism, I suppose, and the relationship between exploration, curiosity, and profiteering, I guess, because archaeology and archaeologists are in this really weird place in terms of the economy of so many parts of the world, where often the stuff that we work on is highly profitable. People want to see it, people want to visit it, people want to learn and understand more about what we've done and how we've done it and what we found and what it means. But the trickle down theory doesn't necessarily work. Often archaeologists find themselves in infamously poorly paid positions, and moments where people who are deploying an awful lot of wealth towards going to probably the most famous submarine wreck site, archaeological wreck site in that sense, namely the Titanic, are so clearly privileged from our perspective. It takes so much to imagine doing what Stockton Rush and OceanGate did, that it's kind of mind-boggling to think of it as purely commercial, I suppose. And actually, I think part of the setting of OceanGate and what it was doing was clearly, from a standpoint of at the very least pretending in some respect that they were undergoing research and exploration. And so it's been, as for so many of us, it's been compelling and fascinating to observe. But also, I think from mine and Andy's perspective, it's been a curious one, because I suppose one of the key questions that we had at the time, when the submersible was missing, apparently, and searches were underway, and to this day, is what is the value of going to Titanic? Or more to the point, I suppose, what's the value of taking people to Titanic from a research standpoint, and from an archaeological and historiographical standpoint? Where do you want to start, Andy?
That's a very good question, because this, as you've just outlined in your intro there are so many questions that go begging when we start discussing Titanic as a cultural event, as a cultural icon, as a hugely commercial object, in the context of, and we're talking particularly about 2 documentaries going forward, plus the United States Coast Guard report, which, as you say, dropped just over a week ago at the time of recording. But a BBC documentary and a second documentary, a longer documentary that was shown on is available on Netflix, which were made while the Court of Inquiry was sitting, and in fact used a lot of material recorded from by witnesses during the Court of Inquiry, which the US Coast Guard facilitated.
Well, and also not only footage of witnesses, but also actually behind the scenes footage of people undertaking the inquiry. We had the chairperson, we had other people involved in that hearing at home, and giving a context of, we're here to give closure to the families, and even we get a moment of reaction when they watch, probably not for the first time on camera, but they're watching together the moment that that Stockton Rush's wife hears what we now think and or know to be the implosion event up on board the support vessel.
Approximately 2 seconds after it occurred. According to the timeline that the Coast Guard report gives us.
So it has been remarkable to see this, and the fact that they have been so clear and transparent, and yet at the same time, you were telling me just before we started recording, they had the stipulation that media coverage would not be allowed to focus on any members of the family who were in the hearings, who were attending. So it's also been compassionate as much as it's been transparent.
And managed. We have to bear that in mind. That particularly and I think we have to bear in mind that one of the issues was the lack of effective oversight of what OceanGate were doing, of what Stockton Rush was doing. And that figure, when you read the report, it's 300 odd pages long, but it is a fascinating document about, and yes, it tells us about Titan. And I think as we'll probably explore more in the conversation as we go forward, it also tells us a lot, I think, about particularly American tech startups. People who think that their cutting edge shouldn't be regulated because that stifles innovation. And whether that's actually sometimes a cover for just being reckless.
Yeah, and it's interesting, actually. I guess we can dive in, no pun intended, in various places. And one of those places actually is on that point about this idea of this as a tech startup. It was quoted in one of the documentaries that Stockton Rush had a fascination with what he called, quote unquote, the big swinging dicks. Namely, people like Elon Musk, people like Jeff Bezos, to a certain extent, I suppose Bill Gates would be in there as well. People who he thought of as being the big boys around whatever table he imagined that they were sitting at, and he wanted to be at that table. And it's also clear that he had an obsession with people who had found themselves connected to Titanic through legitimate and meticulous exploration. In this instance, I'm thinking of James Cameron, where there's a clip having come back from a particular dive where he got to within I think a couple of hundred meters of Titanic at depth. He comes back and says, well, so in total I've got now this many hours in the sub. That's only topped by one man. That's Jim Cameron, and he's expecting people to react to that, to his obsession in that sense with this other person, and no one does. So he clearly was driven. He clearly wanted to be in this club, and at the same time, though, I think it's not clear what the innovation actually was. In so much as it's tech startups, you say that the theory is you don't get in their way because you stifle innovation. and yet there are laws which they deliberately seemingly skirted by having the vessel registered in the Bahamas for insurance purposes, by not flagging the vessel to a particular nation, by having the have it not certified by a third party. It wasn't just that it was a case of the law gets in the way. It was a case of, well, we're not gonna risk it getting in the way, and yet I wouldn't say they was innovative. Rather, it seems that the technology that he was using was a deviation from innovation.
Yeah, I mean, look, again, picking up a couple of things that you've said there. First of all, for Rush, it appears to have been personal on a number of levels. For example, you mentioned that very poignant, in retrospect, moment when his wife just turns to the rest of the crew monitoring the dive and says, "What was that bang?"
You will hear a noise that is external to the ship, or external to the room, I should say, and you will see their reaction to the noise.
Stockton Rush's wife Wendy is waiting for messages from the sub as it nears the sea floor.
What was that like?
We now know what it was. 2 seconds earlier, her husband and 4 other people had died.
Yes.
In the implosion of the sub. But she was actually related to 2 of I think it was the Strausses, Macy's, wasn't it? She came from the family of people who very famously lost their lives on Titanic.
Yeah, and we should say Wendy Rush. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Yes, and I mean, maybe this was made clear in other places and in other ways, but it doesn't seem as though that was a driving factor for her necessarily to go to this place for her family's sake, as it were. And the reason why I say that is I would contrast that with a documentary that I watched again in a very long bit of prep that Andy and I have been doing for this conversation. Documentary by National Geographic, where an expedition a few years ago went to Titanic to do some metallurgical tests. They put a rig down there to see how metals were being affected in that environment. They also took down a submersible to examine the wreck, and specifically had a historian on board who was helping them identify different parts. And they went looking for the staterooms in which a member of the Guggenheim family had been apparently, according to legend, top and tails, dressed in his best, and went down, quote unquote, like a gentleman.
Yes, with his servant, with his butler.
Yeah, precisely. Yeah, sipping whiskey or whatever. But actually, it was interesting because I think they said great grandson of that fellow was on board the vessel, and seemingly, I imagine, probably the family helped to fund this expedition. And he had a very sobering moment when he realised, oh, that's the window of my great grandfather's cabin. I'm not sure that it was the dignified end that we like to imagine. It probably was actually horrific, yes. And that for me is something that you don't see in again any of the. I'm sure a lot of the publicity and marketing has been taken off the internet by OceanGate, but you don't see. Well, I didn't see any of that emotion or poignancy coming from the Rushes in terms of their motivation to be there.
And I think we should say it's been made clear by the entity that was OceanGate that they have ceased all commercial activities and they only exist now to cooperate with the inquiries and support the families of the bereaved. Is what they say. Yeah. So we need to make that clear. I mean, it's
and also so just one more thing about legacy. Stockton Rush himself, his name. His first and surname were both connected to signers of the Declaration of Independence. This guy had such a, I guess you could say legacy. You could also say chip on his shoulder to try and do something remarkable. I
mean, I think you can certainly say. I mean, Stockton Rush and his wife come from an American elite, and he was clearly driven to achieve. Now, it's interesting again.
Sorry.
Go on.
I have to ask again, based on what we've seen. Do you think achieve is the right word, or do you think he was driven to make a mark? It's not the same thing.
That's true.
Because it was pointed out. It's pointed out in interviews with engineers. One colleague in particular, that he lacked fundamental knowledge on the physics of what was happening to the materials in the submarine.
In fact, even more telling, that witness in the interview says that he's supposed to have had a degree in aeronautical engineering, but there were basic scientific principles he was ignorant of.
Precisely, and yet, for example, again in the course of our research, there's footage of him at the Explorers Society in New York, giving
Explorers Club,
giving a lecture, a guest appearance, where he talks about how he had wanted to be an astronaut and couldn't realize that he couldn't quite do that, so he wanted to go to depth. He had what he calls at one point the deep disease. And talked about how he had prepared his whole life for this. But if you're doing that, and he apparently did a degree in engineering, in terms of aerospace engineering, if you're doing that and you are taking it that seriously, if you want to be essentially the astronaut of the Atlantic, why did he lack that knowledge? Is that what I mean? And this is what I mean by achievement. Was he driven to achieve, or was he just wanting to etch his name into the legend of Titanic?
And that's a very interesting question, and it's not one we can answer because there's been no detailed biography of Stockton Rush, and neither the documentaries, these extended, these feature-length documentaries that we've watched, are biographies. What they are explorations of the effect, in retrospect, and even more so in retrospect, now we've got the Coast Guard report, of the impact that one person's personality can have on a company and its working practices, its ethos, even its engineering, when they are in a position of absolute control. And
it's interesting,
and crucially, no oversight from external bodies. Yeah,
it's interesting that so many people, even after the fact, they use the word genius to describe him.
That's completely inappropriate.
Well, that's the thing that I find fascinating. Is this question of motivation, this question of how he was enabled and allowed to go and try and do this, is that clearly either he convinced people that he was a genius, or the word, I suspect it's the latter, the word is used often today inappropriately. People with money are thought to be somehow geniuses themselves.
Well, that's a very, very interesting point, and I think we should probably explore it further. But just for the sake of maybe our viewer who isn't fully across the entire story, perhaps I should just fill in a little bit of a timeline. Basically, in the sort of late noughties, early teens, Stockton Rush has pivoted to deep ocean vehicles. And his USP is that he's going to use not materials like titanium, which the deep submergence industry has been using for decades, very successfully and very safely. But he's going to pivot to using carbon fiber, which has been used, again, effectively and safely in the aerospace industry. But many engineers working on submersibles found highly suspect, to the extent that next to nobody else has used it for crewed submersibles. And the one of the reasons for Rush wanting to use carbon fiber appears to have been that he saw a commercial opportunity to carry paying passengers to deep wreck sites like Titanic, and there's very few others that people might want to visit. OceanGate suggested a number of others, including deep ocean vents and a couple of other wreck sites. But basically, they have one vehicle by 2023, and that was the Titan that was designed to go to Titanic and carry people down to Titanic.
In fact, at one point, he's Rush himself is quoted as saying the Titanic is a brand that he wants to be associated with.
Exactly. And again, maybe we can come back to that later. But so he's trying to be innovative. The point about carbon fiber, as opposed to things like titanium, is cost and weight, but also how you can shape a vehicle. Basically, the crew capsules of deep diving submersibles tend to be round because that's the strongest thing.
Well, spherical.
A sphere. Yeah. With a sphere with viewport or ports. And one of the limitations of that is the number of people you can get into the sphere.
Well, is it?
Well,
I hate to go off on just a slight little tangent, but we have, again, in part of our prep, seen instances. This was on a Canadian television follow-up.
Yeah.
We have seen companies that work with spherical subs and that can fit up to 5 people.
That's right. Which as we know very sadly, is the number of people that were on Titan when it imploded.
Yeah. But regardless, he was convinced that a cigar shape.
He was convinced that a cylinder, a cigar shape would work in those circumstances, and the designs went ahead. So they had a prototype called Cyclops, but then through the 2010s, as the engineering developed, things appear to have started to go wrong. Or corners appear to have started to have been cut as problems arose. So it's now known, for example, that the carbon fiber that was being used had already been rejected by Boeing, or at least the aviation industry, as not up to standard for a passenger carrying airliner or passenger carrying aircraft. Then I think the most serious allegation that was put in the documentaries, it's now there in the report, is that basically Titan was actually the second vehicle of that name. The first Titan, the hull, fortunately was recognized by the pilot doing a pre-dive check, but the first hull had become dangerously what they call delaminated. That the layers of carbon fiber were coming apart and losing their tensile strength, and that to the extent that the whole thing was rebuilt. But they didn't tell anybody that.
No, so this was in 2019. Carl Stanley, pilot, warned Rush on April 18th, 2019, following a crack incident, and also actually there have been some power issues as well on board.
Yeah,
and this was in and around dive 47. The crack was identified, and then in the winter, preparing for the summer of 2020, the hull was replaced.
Yes.
So effectively a second vehicle.
Yeah. It was effectively, whatever percentage the hull was, a new vehicle. Absolutely. Yeah. Again, just for people who haven't seen it, the Titan consisted of titanium end caps, one of which contained a single very large viewport for observation photography, which were linked by a carbon fiber cylinder, which was glued to the end caps. The crew could only get in or out through the end with the viewport, and literally had to be bolted in. There was no way of egress from inside the vehicle.
No.
So in a sense, it was like a space capsule.
Well, and there's some in retrospect rather alarming footage that TV presenter Josh Gates brings to the the BBC documentary we saw on BBC. I believe it's available in other formats, on other channels in other places. This was the documentary Implosion, where Josh Gates, who is a presenter on the History Channel, Expedition Unknown, he's often known for
and other things,
had done research into this. He'd heard about this company that was doing these deep dives, got the higher ups, the heads of the channel, to fund preliminary filming and perhaps even shape a full program around OceanGate. And there's a bit of footage where they're bolting them in, and Rush says, "You're my prisoner now." Well, thankfully, or whatever, you might, however you want to frame this, that dive was unsuccessful. There were power issues, there were engine propulsion issues, and they had to scuttle the dive, if that's the right word. They had to abort the dive, and return to base. Gates said that Rush had a rehearsed answer for everything. He was like a car salesperson, he says. In that footage, I believe that's where Rush says that Titanic was an irresistible brand association, and one of the most amazing brands in the world. And that he also reassured Josh and his team that there had been incremental testing programs implemented on the vessel, but Josh couldn't line up the timeline. He couldn't make it make sense in terms of when the vessel had been in the Bahamas, how and when it had been tested, and things like, for example, changing of the hull, etc. And there had also been some other instances that came to light in and around that time, where, for example, at one point the front of the vessel fell off. The bolts, the 4 bolts, 4 out of I think it was a total of 16 possibly that should have been in place, were being relied upon, because when the vessel goes into the water, pressure is sort of holding it closed as much as anything else. Those 4 bolts, seemingly after many dives, lots of stress, had sheared, and suddenly, I think someone describes the shock of passengers in the vessel who suddenly realise that they can see, that they're now looking at the ocean.
And again, for our viewer to picture this, the Titan had a launching platform. That lifted that used ballast tanks to take the vessel to an angle so it could slide off and into the water. So and reverse the process when the submersible is surfacing. So there are these people who are sort of whatever it is degrees to the horizontal and looking straight down at the ocean, at the Atlantic Ocean.
And suddenly your vessel has no front.
It's
apparently footage of the incident was quickly gathered up. And Rush would say things like, we're covered for insurance in the Bahamas. They don't do criminal negligence, etc. So don't even try and sue me. This kind of thing.
And perhaps this is the point as well, to actually feed in another piece of I think essential background to this, which is the lack of regulatory oversight, the fact that OceanGate was incorporated in America in a state, and it escapes me for the minute which one it was, but it's one where there's relatively little oversight of companies.
Well, I think they were in Washington.
It was Washington State. That's
Washington
right.
State, yeah.
But I'm thinking of you quoted the chair of the. Or you mentioned the chair of the Coast Guard Board of Inquiry, Captain Jason Neubauer, is his name, and he appears in both documentaries. He appears saying he was on the verge of retirement, but he actually asked for the job of chairing that inquiry. He felt it was so important that he wanted that to be his sort of swan song, as it were. He said, "I absolutely wanted this case." And I think, again, I've seen no serious criticism of the report.
Well, and this may be where you're going, but he said, someone, I think at one point asks him, how on earth did this vessel, for example, not go through a registration process.
Yeah.
And his response was by design, I think.
Well, I'll give you the full quote actually, because it's actually even more telling. I think you're absolutely right and that is exactly where I was going. We have prepped this, folks. He said, and I think this is on the Netflix, Titan, the OceanGate submersible disaster is the full title of the documentary. Neubauer says that Titan was not flagged by any foreign nation or any US state. That was very unusual. I've not seen that before. And the producer asks, how does that happen? And Neubauer says, I think it happens by design.
Yeah.
Now, I've seen this, thankfully not in situations where lives are at stake, but I've seen it in situations where, for example, people don't want oversight. So companies are registered, as I said, in states where there's limited oversight, or ships are flagged under foreign jurisdictions where the safety issues might be less stringently enforced, and so on and so on and so on. I'm not going to name any names.
Well, and if you think about it, they went through great geographical effort. Being registered as a company in Washington, launching from Nova Scotia, and having their insurance handled in the Bahamas. That's a massive triangle just to hop, skip, and jump around.
Absolutely. And if you look as well at other jurisdictions that might be involved in this, you've got US citizens in Stockton Rush involved. You've got 3 British citizens, and a French citizen who are on the Titan with him when it implodes. The Darwood's father and son, and Hamish Harding, the aviation entrepreneur, another member of the Explorers Club, if I remember rightly, as well. An adventurer, he's described as. Yeah, exactly. And yes, and yes, both of them very rich businessmen, Mr. Darwood and Mr. Harding. There are other jurisdictions that automatically. The Canadians, of course, it's the support vessel sailed from a Canadian port.
And in terms of geography, they're doing lots of jumping around the rules. But also in terms of the designation of those people on board, they weren't guests, they weren't clients. They were designated as mission specialists. And that mission specialism, they would say with a wry smile, could be as simple as being the person who puts the bolts on, or being the person who flicks a switch here or there. It's the sort of thing that you can understand why some people are very uncomfortable, but other people, and this is actually one of the great questions that was asked, I suppose, after the Second World War. Psychologists, artists, academics and others tried to answer the question, how on earth do otherwise good people do horrific things, or do things which they know should not necessarily be done? And the answer is often it's to do with the culture that surrounds you and surrounds people. There's an instance following Dive 80 on the 15th of July 2021 when a member of the team, Antonella, was told to leave when she said, we can't dive again, following a massive crack having been heard upon almost resurfacing.
Just quickly, for people who haven't seen the documentary or aren't familiar with the report yet, one of the safety features that OceanGate claimed was in place was what they called real-time monitoring of the hull, which was basically little sensors which were supposed to sense the hull becoming stressed. Were meant to sense the hull becoming stressed before it became dangerous. But what again, one of the allegations is that these very loud cracking noises were being heard by the crew inside the cabin space, and Rush would dismiss it. Oh, that's the carbon fiber curing. Now, that is
seasoning.
Not
he said
seasoning. That is not something that any engineer working with carbon fiber would say. That's not what it does.
No, and it's also interesting because he just jumping back briefly to Josh Gates, he said on. I think they actually have footage of him saying. I can't remember if they used that footage, but he certainly said to them on more or less on camera or on the record that the sub makes lots of noises going down. And Josh goes, "Oh, so did you abort the dive at that point?" He goes, No, I kept on going. Of course I did. What else are you going to do? That was obviously a red flag. And he said, and besides, on the next dive, it was fine because I put earplugs in and I couldn't hear it. But with that in mind, Antonella, actually her full name is Antonella Wilby. She was a ROV expert. She had witnessed sloppy pre-dive checks in terms of wires and compartments and so on and so forth being exposed. She'd heard him saying this line about the Bahamas doesn't do punitive damages to clients. Obviously people going ha 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 at the time, but she's like, this is alarming. And when she brought it up, she was told, you don't have an explorer mindset. And this is why I mention this psychological aspect of why do people do these things. The explorer mindset was clearly a culture within the company surrounding this big personality of Stockton, and possibly Stockton and his wife in that sense.
I don't think it's fair to include his wife in that. I think certainly all the reporting and all the evidence.
Yeah, by that I mean to say she's on board. She was part of the admin team. She was a senior member of the team. Sure. She was supporting her husband in everything that she was doing. They didn't look as though there was anyone that Antonella could go to who wasn't going to say you don't have an explorer mindset, and they pushed ahead regardless. So she actually left the ship on that day, and people didn't actually meet her eye. She says that no one even looked in her direction because of this bubble, because of this sense of what we're doing is outside the box, and you just need to get with the program, which is interesting because in other instances, Rush talks about how when you're outside the box, it's difficult to know how far outside you are. So he clearly had some sort of awareness, and some people have even suggested that he knew it was just a matter of time, that eventually it was going to either go with him in it or with someone else in it. That he could not have not known, as it were, that the vessel shouldn't be making cracks, shouldn't have holes through which you can pass a light, for example, a torch, this kind of thing. It's that aspect of a runaway subculture, again, no pun intended, that I think it is hopefully possibly one of the greatest lessons that has to be learned here. At one point, I think you were fascinated by audio from a meeting between a whistleblower and seniors in the company, weren't you?
Well, there's a number of meetings that, in fact, two meetings in particular that are referenced, or two people in particular who are referenced. One is David Lockridge, who was an ex-Royal Navy diver and submariner and expert in submersible vehicles, who went to OceanGate. It's almost like drummers in Spinal Tap, if that's not too tasteless an analogy, because OceanGate got through quite a number of heads of engineering. Lockridge is one, and a man called Tony Nissen is another.
Well, sorry, and also on that front, and pilots. I mean, the fact that eventually they ended up saying, you can be a pilot. You'll be the first female pilot. It'll be amazing. It'll be great PR. They were dropping like flies.
I can tell. No, I can give you a little bit of background, perhaps, into the mindset where that comes from as well, because I think perhaps the way the media handled this is something we can touch on, because this is. The original loss of a Titanic became something of a parable. It was this cross section of Edwardian society just a few years before the First World War, blissfully crossing the Atlantic in luxury, a number of decks above the steerage class people who were going to be doing all the real work. It had presidential aides on board. It had the department store owners, bankers, you name it. And out of arguably a combination of incompetence and hubris, it sinks. Well over 1,000 people die, disproportionately women and children from the steerage class as opposed to other classes. And it becomes this emblematic moment across languages. You know, the Goebbels tried to make a film called Titanic during the Second World War as an attack on the British ruling class.
Right. Yes.
You know, it became a story that you could write onto what you wanted to write onto it. Then when Robert Ballard's team found the ship in the 1980s, it became a triumph for oceanography, technology, maritime archaeology. But very quickly as well, it became caught up in economics again, because there is a commercial company, RMS Titanic Inc., I think it's called, which has the commercial rights to the wreck and anything on the wreck. At the same time, and again, this is where my interest as an archaeologist and as somebody who's interested in maritime archaeology, and particularly the legalities around salvage and so on. I've looked at lots of things which we've talked about on the watching brief at various times. For example, to do with illegal salvage, or where ethics have been sort of bent and even broken, arguably, on certain wreck sites. But Titanic, as of April 2012, became subject to the UNESCO Convention on the Protection of Underwater Cultural Heritage, which means that any country that is signed up to the UNESCO Convention is meant to regulate its citizens and its vessels if they approach vessels like Titanic that are recognized under the convention. So, you know, there is an international heritage angle to this, plus a commercial angle. Again, when I was doing the prep for this, I discovered that when the Titanic exhibition in Belfast was being prepared, I don't know if you've ever visited it when you've been visiting your Northern Ireland relatives, right? And perhaps you can tell us maybe what's in there at the moment. But originally, it was being prepared it was being designed at the time that a private collection of Titanic relics was being put up for sale from a museum that had gone into liquidation. In the US, the bankruptcy administrator put it out to general auction when a consortium, including Titanic Belfast and the National Maritime Museum in Greenwich, wanted to buy the entire collection to keep it together.
Yes.
They were massively financially outgunned in the auction, and currently that collection is owned by hedge funds.
Yeah.
You know, so now that they say that they're going to, you know, monitor and report on where it is and how it is, and it's going to be shown to the public, and so on and so on and so on. Yeah,
but obviously it should be clear. Hedge funds exist to speculate and to accumulate profit. Yeah, precisely.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and then by the 1990s. Jim Cameron makes his movie at the end of the 1990s, but part of that, people who remember the movie remember those very distinctive looking submarines and the ship, the Keldysh, which I think has a named role in the thing. That was actually was a Russian research vessel that was operating those submersibles, and that went down to Titanic and took people down to Titanic, including Tony Robinson, Sir Tony Robinson of Time Team, who went down with Jim Cameron and made a documentary for Channel 4 about it. You know, they were doing safe commercial trips to Titanic. Jim Cameron, I think, says the only person who had been to Titanic more times than he had, mostly on the Russian subs, was P.H. Nogelet, the French former submariner, Titanic expert, who again died on the Titan.
Yes. Yeah.
I think he had 36 dives completed, and Cameron at the time, I saw an interview, said he'd had 33.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, but again, you know, that shows that, you know, the fact that those guys between them had done almost 70 dives perfectly safely.
Hundreds, if not thousands of hours.
Yeah, and other people had done been down many times as well. The Russian submarines have been going down for years. They've stopped now. They're worn out. They've stopped doing it. But They were regularly visiting.
Sorry, you mean
the
you mean to say that they've decided that the vessel has reached its safe usage lifespan and they can't use it anymore?
I think that's the that's the understanding. But look, I mean, the thing is, what happened to the Titan was out of the norm for the undersea industry in general, let alone,
Well, I think what you just outlined there is, first of all, it was ironic, deeply ironic, that wealthy people were visiting this place. And in the same way that, as you say, they sailed serenely high up above the steerage glass on the vessel, they were now using it. And actually, so many other people have also used the vessel as some sort of ego trip. The fact that there are pods left behind on the bridge. I think one person, one man, had his ashes left on the bridge, on it, more or less where he thought the steering wheel would be, is kind of gruesome. So there's that sort of irony there. But then also there's the fact that despite this talk of exploration, this talk of being on the cutting edge of something, none of it was, as you say, new. People had been going there for decades. People had been going there safely for decades, and it was a process that was expensive, but it was understood. And there was a willful desire to, I suppose you could say, and again, it's pointed out here, I think, by one of Rush's friends, I think, or certainly an engineer who counted himself as a friend, that he had a passion for making the deep ocean more accessible to more people. Yeah. So I guess there was an argument that maybe this was a roadmap for making it more affordable eventually, possibly, if they could scale it up. But regardless, there was a deviation from what was already understood to be the way that you do this, and the way that you use materials that are very well understood.
Absolutely, and I think we need to knock on the head the idea that OceanGate were doing any kind of science.
Yes. There was some nods towards it in documentary footage filmed in 2021. He was talking about, we're going to be monitoring the vessel, but Titan was not outfitted for monitoring.
No. All Titan was capable of doing was recording HD video.
Yes.
And images.
Yeah.
It didn't have manipulator arms. It couldn't recover items. It was, it was controlled by, it's tried and trusted technology, but it was controlled by a gamepad. And those mission specialists, as you say, they were called mission specialists as a get around, so they couldn't be called paying passengers, and therefore different insurance and categorizations, classifications would have applied.
Yeah,
that's how they got around it.
Yeah.
They were mission specialists on a scientific expedition doing science and exploration. Bullshit, they were. I can say that. Okay, you can't libel the dead, but I think that's the subtext of the report, and it makes anybody that's ever been involved in any legitimate issues of, when you're actually trying to protect people who are coming to your archaeological site. Do it
in that sense. There's a reason that you can't just walk right up to the edge of a trench.
Exactly,
because you might fall in. Every archaeological site, if there's any risk of the public stopping by and having a look, it's fenced off. It's more
and you have third-party insurance.
And more often than not, there's someone whose job it is to meet and greet and to say, "Hello, do this, don't do that. Here are the rules of the site."
Absolutely,
it's risk management. And
absolutely.
Well, and I suppose this comes back to that things about materials science and about the tried and tested way of using and visiting, using subs to visit Titanic, is that all of that was hard-won risk mitigation, and I mean at one point it was strongly suggested that Rush should be doing this, using Titanic in an unmanned, unpersoned capacity, which he again dismissed out of hand. He said, "Well, David
Lockridge, the ex-Royal Navy submersible engineer who was their head of engineering for a while, or head of operations. I think I can't remember what his exact job title was, but he was a very senior member of the actual operational team to the extent that he could say how things were going to be done.
Well, he said at one point he was certainly piloting the vessel. That's right. In fact, actually, at one point, the two men were in the vessel when Rush got it trapped the Titan in I think cables, possibly even a part of the bulkhead of.
You're describing that they did a test dive to it's a shallower wreck, but it's the Italian liner Andrea Doria.
That's it.
That was sunk in. Yeah, it also sunk in the Atlantic in the 1950s.
Yeah, and
is an iconic it's just reachable by divers on rebreathers.
Yeah,
but technical divers. But it is a deep and dangerous wreck, and yes, it has exactly.
But he was the guy who was able to take over piloting. Eventually, Rush sort of went and relinquished controls.
Well, it's better than that, though, isn't it? Because it describes in very cool terms what actually happened. That Rush was piloting, got the Titan trapped on the wreck, couldn't extricate it. And he said, look, give me the controls, I can sort this. Give me the control, I can sort it. And eventually, it describes how Rush threw the controller across the cabin.
Yeah.
To, and
to an experienced pilot.
Yeah, to somebody who was cool, experienced, knew what they were doing, and they were. It was.
And was trying to save his life. I mean, like it's fascinating, but. He appeared prominently in lots of the coverage of the investigation and the testimony, having sent over the course of 18 months emails to Stockton, even after he was let go. He was eventually, I think, subject.
I think we mustn't use the word "let go." He was fired, as was the other, as was the other head of engineering that was interviewed.
Well, he was fired. He was fired specifically based on the audio from the meeting because he was suggesting things like going and doing testing as it should be done incrementally with an unmanned vessel, or, for example, taking things like cracking seriously, doing a full materials investigation, this kind of thing.
I mean, I think the David Lockridge, I mean, we have to say his role in this was very much the sort of he's the sort of Cassandra figure. He's the whistleblower who wasn't listened to. In fact, that's a whole another issue, because I think one of the really interesting substrands of this is about whistleblowing and the power that big companies have over individuals, the power to shut down individuals. And again, it's something I've got some limited experience of in the work that I've done, where it's crossed over companies like that, where getting threatened it goes with the territory. But to hear it being used in the way that Rush did on his staff, basically Lockridge.
Well, he was director of marine operations.
That's right.
So technically, he was in charge of safety, making sure
he's the number two under Stockton Rush, basically, in terms of when they go to sea.
Yeah,
and he was got rid of, left, whatever. He went to the National Transportation Safety Board in America under their whistleblowing program to say, look, this company is fucking dangerous. And they need
being
to be
Scottish,
at.
He probably did say that.
Well, this is the thing. He filed a complaint under the whistleblowing program, but because of the protocols of the whistleblowing program, the NTSB then appear to have had to inform OceanGate, i.e. Stockton Rush, that the complaint had been made. OceanGate then sued David Lockridge for breach of contract, defamation, you name it. It's what's called lawfare or SLAP, strategic litigation against public participation, where a big player tries to shut down somebody who's got an embarrassing story to tell by basically smothering them in very, very expensive legal proceedings. The NTSB wasn't able to support him, and that's one of the things that is suggested is changed in the in the report to make it safer for whistleblowers to actually blow the whistle in situations like this. But in the end, Lockridge, for trying to save people's lives, was being sued, and he and his wife were threatened with the loss of their house by Russian OceanGate. And in fact, when he's asked about it in the Netflix documentary, and he's Scottish as well, so you have to. I'm not going to try to do that. You have to imagine.
Dismissed me and said they were going ahead with it, and they had already booked clients for that mission in 2018. They were going ahead with us. Everything I'd raised in the report, they had an excuse, they had an answer, and not one of them gave me any confidence. Not one of them. You know, from cathodic protection to nothing. It was a disgrace.
But yes, I wouldn't want to hear you try it.
No, exactly. But and I'm quoting directly here. He said he was asked how he felt about how OceanGate had treated him after the whistleblowing, and he said, "Wankers." That's on camera.
Yes. Yeah.
And then he said, you know, the intent was to shut us down.
Yeah.
And then his a fellow senior engineer at OceanGate, who's also interviewed, Tony Nissim, Nissim rather, quotes a conversation with Stockton Rush where he says, he told me it would be nothing for him to spend 50,000 to ruin somebody's life.
Yes. Yeah. Which is kind of horrifying, really.
Yeah, and the evidence is that's what he tried to do to Lockridge. You know, that's what OceanGate tried to do to Lockridge. But again, they're not alone in that. That's American corporate culture, and to an extent British corporate culture as well. You know, one of the first things that happens if you go to somebody to ask them for comment on a story, and I say I've had it happen to me, is, you know. And I've seen it happen to other people as well on stories that I've been involved with. Said, you know, are you absolutely sure of your facts? It could get very expensive for you. You know, yes, actually, you know, we've double sourced everything. So, you know, a lot of the time it is bluff. And there it would have been bluff. You know, had Lockridge been able to follow through, had he had the protections in place to withstand a slap suit, it's almost certain that he would have won because of the way because of what would have come out in court.
Yes, and in that sense, it was so obvious that Rush was doing things, in his own words, doing things outside the box. Yeah, it was so clear.
He does come across as if there's, you know, there aren't any heroes in this, but he's one of the good guys. He's
a serious naval and maritime expert. Yeah, professional.
Yeah, professional.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose this thing about why it happens and why and how this sort of thing can go forward. It feels as though it's an awful lot of small things. So, I mean, it's clear from the 60 Minutes interview that Jem Cameron filmed with Australian 60 Minutes that he has strong opinions, and he's not shy about saying that the submersible community would not have done things the way the Rush was doing it. So it's clear that lots of those small things were being ignored. The culture within the subculture, I guess, again, no pun intended, was being ignored. But also it's clear that in the Canadian documentary that I sent your way and that I alluded to earlier, that even just day-to-day operations in port were just very casual. It was assumed, it was presumed, baked in, I suppose, that a vessel in the harbour that was going out to sea was being handled properly. And yet, when you actually look at it closely, the owner of the vessel that they rented to get the sub out to location themselves said, "Oh well, safety was in the hands of the people who were renting the vessel. That's not my position to handle that." People in the harbour observing it couldn't believe that they, at that point, they'd actually ditched having the sub on the ship and then lowering it, because that was an expensive proposition. They had to shrink the support vessel down. So instead they were towing it out on its platform where it's subject to rocking waves and wind and all sorts of bashing around.
And they'd also, I can't remember which of the two documentaries, I think it's the Netflix one, makes the point that it had, between 2021 and 2022 and 2023, it had been left in the open on the dockside in St John's, Newfoundland throughout the winter.
Yeah.
Subjected to,
so freeze thaw action, that kind of thing. Exactly. So this sort of nothing else, the corrosive nature of salt water, being exposed at sea level all the way out. I think it was a couple of 100 kilometers out. Was struck people as strange on ground level. There were people who were interviewed who work in the harbour going, well, yeah, we saw it and it looked a bit odd. But again, it was assumed that clearly someone was ticking a box somewhere properly. Yeah. And then even harbour authorities, when interviewed, were sort of giving the impression that they had assumed that this had been okayed somewhere else on the chain. Notably, though, when filming interviews with members of the public and staff in the harbour, they did get checked by port authorities because clearly now they're on top of things. They're like, what's that boat doing there? Let's make sure that they're up to code, etc. So, but it's interesting how all these small things combined. In order to allow, I wouldn't say enable, but allow a big personality to have a company in which there was a shielded, bubbled world view, I guess you could say, a sort of as they say, explorer's mindset, to put people at risk in this way, and all to visit an archaeological site effectively that has been visited many times.
Well,
in probably the most hostile environment on Earth.
Oh, the deep ocean, absolutely. Yes, the pressures, the temperatures. There's no light. It's an incredibly challenging place.
I mean, the vessel itself is being eaten away. Steel doesn't survive down there.
I mean, the suggestion. I come back to the suggestion that they were doing science. What immediately became clear when Titanic, until Titanic was found, there was relatively little study of what happens to wrecks, particularly steel wrecks and wrecks in deep ocean, iron wrecks in deep ocean, because people just couldn't go there. There are historically significant vessels at great depth, the Titanic being the most famous. And what was immediately clear after Ballard's team came back with the images was, I don't know if you remember the famous rusticles, where the iron plates are literally, they almost appear to be melting. And that is the effect of something which is really unknown, which is bacteria eating away at the metal. And metal plates have been recovered remotely from Titanic. It's a very large hull plate that's now on land. It's been subject to documentaries and testing and all sorts of things. But the main way that is the ship is being monitored has been by 3D HD photography. And
combined with things like LiDAR as well.
Combined with things like LiDAR and so on. So the site is probably one of the best imaged and mapped in maritime archaeology currently, because people have thrown money at it and technology at it.
Well, but also it should also be said though, but notably, even then, with a bias towards the prow of the ship, the front of the vessel.
Naturally, that's changed. I'll come to that in a second.
Okay.
I'll come to that in a second.
Okay.
But yeah, look, the prow of the ship became iconic. Mostly, I would argue, because of the Jack and Rose scene in Titanic. Yeah, that became iconic to the extent that there's a story that, for example, the couple that wants to get married.
Actually, no, I disagree. I think it became iconic because of the reveal of the wreck in that movie. Actually, Jack and Rose turn up on it. That's true. But the first thing we see is the sub coming upon it, don't we, in the dark, and suddenly the ship comes out. I think that's That's the moment.
And that's a filmmaker's conceit, because
Yeah.
the first thing that was found of the Titanic when Ballard actually found the wreck was one of the boilers
Yes.
in the debris field, which is astern of the, and some distance away from the prow. But yeah, look, certainly that movie, I think, created the modern visual imagery of Titanic.
Yeah.
Jim Cameron is a brilliant filmmaker, and with a certain kind of material, and that movie, it may have been, you could criticize it on a number of historical grounds, and I would do quite happily, because I think it took unnecessary liberties with the history. I don't mind taking liberties with the history within reason, but it took some unnecessary liberties with the history, I feel. But that's a whole other discussion. But what interestingly, what he did with that movie, he embedded it in the science as then was, with the actual creation of that wreck site as it was then understood post Ballard. Back in the early 70s, there was a famous movie called Raise the Titanic, which Sir Lou Grade commissioned, and
Based on the
it was based on a
Cussler novel. Yeah.
Based on it was one of the first of the Dirk Pitt novels that was filmed, and it was so expensive and such a failure that Lou Grade supposedly said afterwards, Raise the Titanic, it would have been cheaper to lower the Atlantic. But that had the conceit, the image of the ship being in one piece that could be lifted to the surface. The moment Ballard's data became public, that fantasy disappeared, but what you had was then you could then pivot back to looking at the human story of Titanic, what that wreck actually embodies, archaeologically, culturally, and so on. And I think it's really interesting, I think, and it's maybe one of the things, perhaps as we draw this rather discursive discussion to a conclusion, I just, the cultural side versus
except we actually hadn't addressed the point that this little rabbit trail came off from, and that is, what was the need to go back there when it was a well understood site? We've seen it in film and so on and so forth. Yeah. This is the point
I want to make.
Yeah.
This is the point I want to make.
Yeah.
We've got Titanic as a cultural symbol. We've got Titanic as an archaeological site. I think, in the spring of 2023, when Titan left the surface to go to Titanic, that was the cultural expression of the importance of Titanic in action, the brand, the place where an exclusive group of people with $250,000 to spare can go in this vehicle and take pictures and say that they've been there. Why do you climb Mount Everest? Mallory was asked. Because it's there. Why do you go to Titanic? Because it's there. The point is no. Hang on. I just want to make a point.
Yeah.
If you look at the archaeological side, also in 2023, company called Magellan Limited, which is a deep water imaging company, said that they created a digital twin of the Titanic. Which, now, this was subject of a documentary recently on Nat Geo, if I remember rightly. But basically, they used two ROV submersibles,
unmanned,
and mapped the entire 5.6 square kilometer debris field, and took something like 750,000 3D images, which were then stitched together. That's the science of monitoring Titanic. You don't do it by sticking a camera through a porthole in a homemade submersible. And that's what OceanGate were doing.
Yes, and that goes back to why I was talking about in terms of the bias towards the front of the ship. Up until that expedition, the bias had always been, the most interesting part of the wreck is the front. The back
Only for the media. Only for the media.
Well,
A lot
but
people
that,
who actually study Titanic, maritime archaeologists who study the wreck and the creation of the wreck site and how the wreck happened and so on, have always known.
Except we're not talking about people who were there to study the wreck. We're talking about people, as you just said, who were there to take selfies.
Yeah.
And this is.
Well, I'm not knocking that.
This is my point. Up until that expedition, the back of the wreck, which has collapsed, and in many people's words and assessment, is barely recognisable in that sense. It's a scrap pile. Wasn't the sexy part of the ship, and this is the thing about this. This is why I said no. Come on. When you mention Hillary and Everest, Hillary did not say, "I went there to snap a selfie. I went there to take a photo of myself on the map." No, he did it because as far as he was concerned, no one else had done it before, and he wanted to go there. That's a pioneering effort. You could also say it's a nationalistic effort in his case, or for empire or whatever. The same goes for first efforts to go and visit Titanic. Yeah, because it's there. That's true. But these people, even though, despite the news coverage at the time, having lots of people talking about pioneering culture and the spirit of exploration, these people were going for a photo op.
Yeah.
And they were, and I'm not. If you've got the money, you can spend it how you want. I'm not criticizing people for that. Yeah. But they were going for a photo op in a situation that was illegal, certainly in terms of hadn't passed stringent certification and testing in order to be able to take paying passengers down, and therefore had to go as mission specialists. Yeah. And that desire, that need to be there, is something that I even ironically enough, as an archaeologist, as someone who loves history, loves touching the past, loves that connection, that moment that you feel when you understand something about another person who you're never going to meet because you're so far separated in time and space. Even that, with all of that said, I wouldn't want to go to Titanic. I don't see the point of going there, and I think comparing essentially a sightseeing expedition, a pleasure cruise, to something like going to the moon or like going up onto Everest for the first time is not a good enough reason. And the same goes for Everest. I mean, these days we're seeing literal congestion on the mountain, aren't we? People queuing and then trying desperately to get a photo of themselves at the top that makes it look as though they're on their own at the top of Everest, and all the while passing literal corpses of the dead, people who in a couple of infamous cases simply weren't prepared. They went up there thinking that, well, it's been done before, I want to do it as well, and they froze they either suffered altitude sickness and then died, or they froze and died. There's something that I want. The reason why I'm bringing this up is I'm not saying this to have sort of righteous indignation. It's more a case of, will this lesson be learned, or are we simply going to be, us mere mortals, as archaeologists who don't have a lot of money in the bank, going to have to witness this over and over again? Wealthy people getting away with stuff that we definitely couldn't, and risking their lives, if not losing their lives, for the sake of what is increasingly not actually a once in a lifetime, or indeed a unique or small club experience. You're not crossing the threshold for the first time, folks, even though it might look good on your Facebook profile or whatever. I don't know. How do you? I guess what I'm saying is, how do you feel about these lessons? Do you think that they can and will be learned?
Okay. Was I the only person? Well, the two of us. My immediate thought watching this was, this is Elon Musk. this is Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin. You know, in terms of not necessarily in terms of the recklessness, although Musk you can make a case for. Certainly in terms of we're too big, we're beyond regulation, we're innovative, we shouldn't be trammeled by normal human brains who aren't in the same space that we are, and can't see things in the way that we do. Because that appears to be what Rush was wanting.
Yeah.
And it appears to be that Silicon Valley move fast and break things.
Yeah.
Move fast and delaminate your material that nobody else uses on deep submersibles.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
And so in that sense, do you think writ large basically are case studies of people who are seemingly beyond certain standards? That said, though, obviously, as my understanding, Blue Origin and SpaceX are subject to certification, aren't they, and testing?
They are. But under the Trump administration, for example, an Elon Musk was trying to place allies in the regulatory bodies.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Those regulations are still nonetheless seen as things that get in the way. Yeah.
Precisely that. And in fact, you know, if you're talking about move fast and break things, arguably Musk bringing that Silicon Valley attitude to Doge, particularly in the way that, for example, USAID was cut, is potentially going to lead to the completely unnecessary and avoidable deaths, not of 5 people on a submersible, but of possibly tens of thousands of people, especially children in Africa.
Well, but also, frankly, as it stands, US citizens and Medicaid.
Exactly. The ramifications are going to work through over the next, the forthcoming years. And, I think people, if the media do their job, we can maybe finish up by talking about the media that this sits in, because I think it's an interesting story there as well. But anyway, that'd be just the final thing I'd want to talk about briefly. But no, I think what this is an object lesson in why nobody should be above regulation. Absolutely nobody, no matter how innovative they are and how much they say they're following the science and so on. As we saw in the case of OceanGate, and yes, you can't libel the dead, but basically what Rush was saying was just so much marketing bullshit, and it killed people.
Yeah, there is something about the idea that if you put a well manicured smile on something, that you can fake it till you make it. That shouldn't wash, but unfortunately clearly has washed far too often in the past. But it's not, I agree. It's not just regulation, but also this should be an object lesson in how regulations and the law is something that you should not be above and cannot be above. I mean, again,
and that's clearly something. Again, if you read the US Coast Guard report into all this, and again, I do urge people to do it. It's a very clear, well-written document, and it's absolutely eye-opening and jaw-dropping on occasions. The way that they talk about a toxic workplace, they go into the details of the lawfare and so on. And it is frightening what was happening in that company. In terms of what people can get away with, and the inability, which they acknowledge, of the authorities to intervene. Which for any of us, who use vehicles of any kind, is concerning, I think.
Yes, absolutely. So, do you want to make your point about media, and then I think I have a final thing that we'll wrap up on.
Okay. Obviously, we the starting point for this was 2 feature-length documentaries, or let's say 1 feature length, 150-minute, 1 feature length. Both of them detailed, both of them very cool, very objective. They didn't go on the human interest, the human tragedy angle, whatever. Really, but they were. I think that they were done with a great deal of responsibility and an understanding of the material they were dealing with. I think it is very interesting to contrast that with another documentary that could be made about the way the media responded in the first instance, where it was treated as a rolling news human interest story. So we started getting background on the individuals and so on. Where
it was treated as a disaster movie where at some point you're going to have Jim Lovell emerging from a capsule.
Interesting. Well, I've got a point to make about that in just a second, actually, because I think it's a very interesting.
Or the countdown. I mean, so things like the oxygen countdown. Yeah.
Which, as Jim Cameron said in that interview with Australian TV with ABC, everybody in the submersible community knew that the moment they lost communication with that vessel, they were gone.
Well,
there was no other
and tracking
and telemetry.
So
they lost communications and telemetry simultaneously, and the only way that would have happened was that the vessel had imploded, and it would have imploded before anybody knew anything about it. And that's what was that bang that Wendy Rush asked about. The telemetry said, 2 seconds earlier they'd lost the telemetries on, then the bang was transferred to the surface. That's how long it took the sound wave.
And yet, as you say, the coverage was about the massive search patterns that were being undertaken, the as you say, the background of the people on board, the fact that there might be hope, this idea of banging that could be heard from
and whatever the reason, and again, there were some sensible talking heads talking about the extreme unlikelihood of any rescue. If even somebody who's read The Hunt for Red October knows that part of the North Atlantic is monitored 24/7 by the US Navy. Because they have underwater listening arrays that can triangulate on the positions of particularly submarines and any other noise that happens in the deep ocean. And we now know, again, that the US Coast Guard were informed early on that the noises consistent with an implosion had been identified at that spot at that moment. So so the rest of it, I'm not saying it was performative. I suppose they argue, people argue, you until they actually found the wreckage, then there was always even if there was a tiny percentage of a possibility, then they had to follow through on it. But the media wouldn't address that one.
No.
I think the other interesting as well, again, some of the more thoughtful coverage, and again. We'll link to it below the line, I think. But that interview with Jim Cameron, film director on Australian television, was, again, very illuminating, because he's talking about it not just as a film director, but also as somebody who's helped design submersibles, and in fact took a submersible to the deepest part of the ocean on the planet, the Challenger Deep in the Pacific. But as he pointed out there, they were able to not certify that particular submersible because it was only ever designed for one person to go in it, and that was either him or his design partner on the project. So as an individual, he was able to take that risk. He wouldn't take that risk if he was taking a paying passenger.
No.
And so that yes, there is room for innovation and science, but not if you're putting other people's lives at risk.
No. And even in terms of the coverage, even that coverage was reaching for the story. So there were moments in that interview where she the interviewer, sort of says, "Well, and why aren't they talking to you? You're clearly such an expert." It's almost getting too excited about the potential for what the story might be, rather than potentially covering what it is, I guess.
Absolutely. And also, you can say, in terms of Cameron, well, first of all, he was a civilian. He's a film director. Hadn't had the money to get involved in those kind of projects. He was really interested in them. He's been down to Titanic a lot, but he wasn't. He didn't have anything any information to shed really on. There were plenty of other people in the submersible industry, including people who had previously worked for OceanGate, who were able to illuminate the way OceanGate worked and the science and the engineering.
Well, but more to the point in that sense, there were plenty of other people in the community, but also without them having to be there, that could outline the standards which were not being followed, because these standards are well understood. That's the point of having them.
Yes,
and so,
also having the media baggage to be, it would have completely dominated.
Yes, having Jim Cameron turn up, fresh from his latest Avatar movie.
Yes, exactly. Which is not to degrade, his commentary. He does know of what he speaks when it comes to those.
No, he does. Yes. But as you say, talking about the coverage, it would be inescapable that the media would cover it in that way.
Maybe he would have liked to have been at the centre of it, but I think it's entirely appropriate, really, in the end, that he wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, he was relatively humble. It's just that he also was like, I don't know. I've offered my services, but they haven't.
Yes.
So yeah. Just bringing it back to a serious, very serious final point. There's a quote at the end of the Implosion documentary, the one that we saw on BBC iPlayer.
Yes.
Where Christine Dawood, I think that's how you pronounce it, or Dawood, is asked about this and whether or not she thinks it's a crime, whether or not justice might be found.
And she was widowed and lost her son.
Yeah. In this particular incident. In
the incident.
And throughout the piece, they show her rather poignantly in an empty house, basically. So without saying it, they're showing that she's on her own.
Yes.
And has been left on her own within that family unit. They ask about this being a potential crime. This is set up up to this question, up to this point, and she says, "Well, the problem is that the culprit, quote, died with them. Who am I to blame?" She says, and to her credit, she doesn't seem as though she's desperate for blame in a vindictive way. I think she and so many other people are seeking catharsis, and as some members of the investigation team in the US said, closure. And I suppose I can only hope that in the hours, days, weeks, and months since that was recorded, that the process of the investigation and now its findings have given her something in that sense of knowing and knowing that it is known who is to blame, and whatever comfort that might come with that. I know that seemingly was at the forefront of Jason Neubauer's approach to this investigation, and to a certain extent, I don't suppose we need to know really what happens next with some of these people. It's right that it's private. Lives were lost, and with the exception, I suppose, of the Nargeolet family, as you said, taking OceanGate to court. It's good that we've had a sense of their loss, but also that we're not doing that media thing of asking for one final comment, one final point of reaction, that kind of thing.
I don't think there is. Look, the story of the Titanic has now gone on for over 110 years. It's been a cultural icon for all that time. The first movie about the Titanic came out within a few months of the actual disaster and included a survivor.
Well, this is. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we'll have this as a little extra on this or not, but this is an interesting little additional idea here. Is I was curious about how did people react who remembered the wreck, remembered the catastrophe, to the idea of this being entertainment. And it's clear that obviously reaction was varied. Some people thought it was atrocious, that you couldn't possibly make a movie out of such a horrible event. Other people, not only in some cases, as you say, starred in the movie, but I believe on A Night to Remember, one of the survivors, who at that point was 80, I think, attempted to sneak onto set so that he could go down with the ship again. He thought it was a marvelous historical recreation.
I thought it was most extraordinary. I had no idea that the realism could be produced in such a wonderful fashion.
And he wanted to be involved. So I think, because my initial thought was that this idea of Titanic as entertainment, and I think I might have mentioned this in the Watching Brief episode that we did, possibly when in and around the Titan, the loss of the Titan. My initial thought was that actually it's quite crass that this stuff happens, and I certainly thought it was crass when I went to the Belfast Titanic exhibition, and you could get an actual unsinkable rubber ducky in Star Line uniform, White Star Line uniform for your bathtub. I thought that was a bit on the nose, a bit uncomfortable. But it's fascinating that actually it's hard. And again, in many ways, as anthropologists, we understand that you can't really account for a mass group of people's experience and understanding of something by looking at any one individual. So it's been interesting to see and to do a little bit of research into what people's reactions to those movies were. I believe the daughter, can't quite remember her name. I want to say Margaret. I'll put her name on screen. The daughter of Captain Smith went to the filming again, I think, of A Night to Remember. Met the gentleman who was playing her father, and found it incredibly moving and emotional. And often people talked about these things as being memorializing as much as being entertaining. And in that sense, we started this episode with me saying this is not entertainment. This isn't, we're not talking about this in the Unstratified Entertainment title bracket necessarily. But it's fascinating how entertainment for some people is poignant, and I should also say at the other end of that bell curve there were people who couldn't make it all the way through the film. There were people who'd survived the sinking who found it too harrowing, a little bit like the range of reactions that Second World War veterans had to Steven Spielberg's depiction of the D-Day landings. Actually, some people thought it was poignant and necessary, other people thought it was so good that they couldn't watch it. And so I'm sorry to have gone off on a slight tangent there, but I don't think it is a tangent. I think it's absolutely crucial to any discussion of this kind of incident, this kind of heritage linked site and living event. Memory, and living memory. Well, you talked earlier on about dark heritage, dark tourism. Obviously, I deal with conflict archaeology, and there's a heck of a lot of dark tourism in that. Nazi war diggers, sorry. But also, even just the darkness of the events themselves. So, for example, you go to the Tietval Memorial, go to just drive around near Ypres and see when you see a road sign for Passchendaele. It's there in the cultural marrow of anybody born afterwards, and you only have to just scratch a little bit and expose it. And I think actually around here I would describe that as the strange mundane of the lives that continue around historic places. So here, this isn't to do with a disaster, but here in Wallsend, the fact that people go and do that, I do my shopping, and on the way to the shops, I see signs for Hadrian's Wall. The fact that life that does go on, and that can have positive and complicated associations. It does, and I think I'd make a sort of a final point there, in that when we're looking at the Titanic as an event, it's now very common to ascribe, back in the day, Thomas Hardy wrote a poem called The Meeting of the Twain, where
the iceberg and the Titanic meet through pure chance and happenstance. Fate, if you like. Now, though, we don't talk about Titanic in terms of fate. We talk about Captain Smith, who was, as every naval officer was at the time, inexperienced in handling 40,000 plus steamships travelling at over 20 knots in ice fields. And the head of the line, J. Bruce Ismay, allegedly crumpling up an ice warning and putting it in his pocket at dinner hours before Fred Fleet saw that iceberg in front of the Titanic. In other words, it wasn't fate. It was hubris, incompetence, possibly even an element of negligence, of wanting to have the ship driven to... They were never going to make the blue ribbon. Titanic wasn't capable of that, but what she was capable of was a very fast, efficient voyage. That's what Ismay wanted for the maiden voyage of his new flagship. And there are naval historians of Titanic, who would say that that combination of a toxic workplace, to use the words that the US Coast Guard used in the report of OceanGate, caused the loss of the original Titanic. And it's a deep, dark irony that exactly the same things may have caused the loss of the Titan.
Well, folks, thank you so much for watching. Please do comment below. Please do continue the conversation. If there's anything that you think that we've missed, then obviously let us know as well. And as ever, until next time, do take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.